Hello, cruel world. This is my AMA Ask Me Anything celebration of hitting 15,000 subscribers. I asked you for questions, you gave them to me, I'm going to answer them. Plus I've got a present for you later on in this episode. Let's get straight into it. I should say that there's so many questions that I'm going to split this into two parts. So this is part one. Okay, first question is from Inspiring Minds Therapy. A massive congratulations on 15K, thank you. Have you ever diagnosed a client with severe mental health illness and then later discovered that they have fabricated their symptoms? Great question. The answer is yes. Generally speaking, it very rarely happens, as far as I'm aware. And I think that's because forensic psychiatrists such as myself are very good at spotting people that are faking mental illnesses. Simply because we're around people with these diagnoses, something like psychosis, when someone's hearing voices or having paranoid delusions all the time. So we can tell if something is off. I'll give you some very brief clues of how we can tell. So one would be that somebody who's genuinely psychotic, say paranoid, if it's the first time they've met me and I'm assessing them for like a prison court report, then they're going to be guarded, they're going to be evasive, they're not going to blurt out their innermost paranoid thoughts. It's going to take some teasing for me to get these experiences and these symptoms out. Whereas somebody who's trying to fake it generally has an agenda. So they immediately try and convince me that they're mentally unwell, within minutes. And it's a bit too forced. It's hard to describe unless you're actually there, but it's a bit too forced and that gives it away. So I think generally I'm quite good at spotting fakers. Always be plugged in. I've actually got a series on faking mental illness. I'll put the links in the descriptions below. And I talk about a time where I did get psyched out by a patient who was faking it. So there was a young woman in prison who was, in my mind, absolutely floridly psychotic. She was screaming, she was shouting, she was locked in the healthcare unit because she was so unwell, banging on the door about 23 hours a day. She was doing a dirty protest on the walls. If you don't know what it is, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. I was convinced that she was floridly psychotic. Other people in the prison that I was working in, who'd worked there for much longer and who knew her from previous prison sentences, told me that I was wrong and that she was faking it and that she just nobody really knew why she did it. She just kind of did it for attention. And I went against the clinical grain because I was so convinced, and I arranged a mental health act assessment for her on the day that she was released in prison. And that's quite a big deal to arrange this assessment because it involves all these other professionals coming in, another independent doctor, senior social worker. And on the day that they came, the day that she's being released, she completely snapped out of it. She was absolutely fine. She was faking it the whole time. My colleagues were right. I was wrong. It was embarrassing. It was professionally embarrassing. Still don't fully understand why she did it. That's just a very quick summary. I talk about this particular case in a lot more detail in 2 Minds. Sorry, I'm going to be mentioning my book quite a lot in this episode just because a lot of the questions you ask I cover in detail in my book. Anyway, moving on. Just before I get on to the next question, I just want to say thank you so much for everybody that's been a fan of this channel and has helped me grow recently. Sub numbers are starting finally to go off after months or years even of a hard slog. They're starting to increase exponentially. By the way, I just love that word exponentially. It's got such a sexy tone to it. In fact, ever since I learned what the word exponentially means, my use of the word exponentially has been growing shitloads. To say thank you, I've got a little present for everybody, which I'll tell you about later on in this episode. Okay, next question from Kelly. Congratulations on 15K, thank you. May your channel grow even bigger, thank you. I'd like to ask you if there's a case that broke you, and if so, which one it was. I wouldn't say there's a case that broke me in that it made me so upset that I couldn't cope with it, but there certainly have been cases which have been close. So there's one that I talk about in a previous video and also in my book. Her name is, I've called her Yasmin Khan. That's not her real name. I'm protecting her identity. But basically it was about an 18-year-old girl who completely randomly out of nowhere became psychotic. No history of violence, no history of mental illness, no history of antisocial behavior. And out of nowhere, she, in a flash of psychosis, smothered and killed her 3-year-old nephew when she was babysitting him. Absolutely tragic case, obviously. Not only was it tragic for what happened, but even after, it took her, I saw her in prison and then I transferred her to our medium secure unit and she gradually got better, but it took a very long time. and to see her getting better and her to appreciate and understand what she did, because when she was psychotic, she had these delusional beliefs about removing demons from the body of her nephew. That's why she did what she did. She genuinely believed that because of her mental illness. And after months of medication, reality seeped in, and then, as you'd expect, she became extremely depressed about what she did. So it was really emotional. On top of all of that, I was regularly in contact with her brother as part of the family therapy to reconnect that relationship, her brother being the father of the young boy that she killed. So it was all just really, really emotionally charged. As I said, it didn't break me, but it was probably one of the most difficult cases that I've had to deal with. It was also one of my very early cases, so I wasn't even a consultant, I was still a junior doctor. The other thing I would say that it's not a specific case, but in general, it was quite hard to cope with was recidivism. So recidivism is when people reoffend. So we spend all these time and resources and money trying to rehabilitate these people in our secure units. And I've been in charge of many of these patients. And even though most of them go on to lead productive, decent lives, a small proportion do reoffend and come back in the system. I wouldn't say it broke me, but it certainly made me question whether it was all worth it and whether what I was doing was, whether there was any merit in it really. But I guess I was just a bit naive when I first started this job, and over time I've come to accept that no matter what we do, there's always going to be a cohort of people who reoffend. The reason being is because at the point of discharge they're well, but outside in the big wide world they've got loads of vices, drugs and alcohol, not wanting to take their medication because of side effects, access to victims. So what I'm saying is we can't predict what's going to happen in the future, so you just have to accept that that's part of the job. Whew. Next question, 𝐿𝐵𝐿𝐲𝐜𝐡 question: have you ever had a case or experience that made you rethink your career? No, the stuff that I was talking about in the previous question was definitely, I don't even think upsetting is the right word, but definitely difficult to cope with, challenging maybe, but it didn't make me rethink my career. However, there was an experience, which again, sorry for repeating myself, but I outline in detail in my book, where I clashed with a consultant. So I was a middle grade psychiatrist, I was a registrar, and even though the majority of my consultants were very good, there was one in particular one. In the book, I've called her Dr. Peck, not a real name, and we just did not get on. I thought she was really lazy. I didn't think she really guided the team, which is basically her job. She didn't give any, make decisions about patients. She didn't guide people, didn't tell them what to do. And it really pissed me off. And so I did some things that I shouldn't have done. So I made a couple of sarcastic comments at times during ward rounds. Well, in my head, they weren't sarcastic, but they were things like sort of expressing frustration that we weren't really getting anywhere with patients. Dr. Peck thought that was insulting to her and the team, whereas I knew behind closed doors that the teams felt the same way because they would tell me. And also I would occasionally tell the team what to do. I'd give them instructions only because she didn't, and I was like her second in command, so I went way above my station. I'm not allowed to do that. There is a hierarchy. I wasn't a consultant. It's a bit like being a made man in the mafia, right? So you can do what you want. If you're a made man, you don't have to ask for permission, whereas if you're not made, you're not allowed to have a hit out against the made man. If there are any mafioso watching this, tell me if I'm correct. You're not allowed to have a hit out against the made man. If there are any mafioso watching this, tell me if I'm correct.
It's funny because it's true.
But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I got into a lot of trouble for this. So she never raised any of this with me, but she raised it with my training program director, who's in charge of my training for the rest of my career as a junior doctor. And I got into loads of trouble, and I did question my career. But luckily I was then given another boss, another much better, much more supportive consultant, and everything ended up well. All's well that ends well. But yeah, that definitely made me question my career. Okay, moving on. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜 Singh. She's got, she or he, I'm guessing, sorry 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜, I don't know. 3 questions, I'm going to answer them all because they're very good. How can you make a competitive psychiatry application, especially for ST4 forensic psychiatry? What things increase your chances as a doctor applying for training? So to become ST4, that's the jump between becoming a senior house officer to becoming a registrar, is when you specialise in forensic psychiatry, but you're not yet a consultant. So you have to gain a competitive place into that. So I'll answer that question, but I think this probably, hopefully fits in all kinds of applications within the world of forensic psychiatry, and even maybe in a wider sense, which is this. The vast majority of applicants don't go through the extra bit of effort to show that they're really interested in that specialty. So to be specific, when I did my applications, I made sure that I'd spent a couple of sessions in prison. So I went to see other consultants and basically begged them to just follow them around for a day. That's all it really takes, or even half a day. So I go to do a session with them in prison as a psychiatrist, or I go do a session in court diversion, or I go into a medium secure unit. And literally all it takes is a day, and then you can write that on your application and obviously think of some things that you found interesting about that experience to talk about in the interview. Just doing that will put you head and shoulders above most of the competition. I hope that's helpful. Number 2 for 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡 saying, how much do psychiatrists earn in private practice and through medico-legal work if you're comfortable sharing? I'm not going to tell you how much I personally earn because I think that's a bit crass, but I will say in general terms that actually it can be quite lucrative to work. I don't know anything about private practice because I only do medico-legal work, but I'm talking about court reports. So solicitors or courts, or occasionally the Crown Prosecution Service, will pay me to do an independent assessment of a defendant, either in prison or if they're on bail in their office. And then I have to talk about their mental health and whether that affects their offending and criminal culpability. And as I say, it's quite lucrative. You can get between £1,000 to £2,000 a report. I'd say probably closer to £2,000. And you could potentially do 1 or 2 of these a week on top of your NHS salary. That doesn't mean that everybody is able to do that. Some people don't have enough time, etc., etc. Some people are not that good at it. But if you're able to do all those things, then I think we're talking about a comfortable 6-figure salary, if that interests you. But there's also pitfalls to doing that. So very briefly, the work isn't guaranteed. So if you're not that good at your job, or if you gain a bad reputation, then your earning potential will crash. And the other thing that's a massive bugbear of mine is that there's a huge delay in getting paid by a lot of lawyers. Not all lawyers, but a lot of them are literally couldn't care less and will ignore my emails and phone calls and won't pay me for months. I've even gone as far as having to get in like professional companies for debt recollection because lawyers won't pay me. So I guess what I'm saying is, even though it's lucrative, there are downsides to it as well. Okay, now I really like this next question. Would you still recommend being a doctor, given that, from a medical student perspective, morale seems to be at an all-time low, and many more doctors I know have changed their minds to say they don't endorse a medical career? They say it's in decline and not worth the stress or time in training. That is a great question. So much so, 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡, that I'm going to do what 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡, I'm going to do what I promised to do in my AMA video, which I'm going to send you a copy of my book. If you're based in the UK, let me know in the comments and let me know your address. If you're based abroad, I'll send you a PDF version, and also you get to choose the next case that I do from this question. And here's my answer. Firstly, some of you might not know this, but I am a doctor first, an NHS doctor. All psychiatrists are doctors first. Psychologists are not. They often get conflated. I would say that I've had a pretty lucky career in many ways. So as a psychiatrist, my hours are much easier than a lot of my friends and colleagues. I have to do a lot less on call, etc., etc. So I've got it relatively easy. The flip side of that is that I have to deal with, patients committing suicide. That happens. Patients going on to commit murder. That also happens. Aggression fairly regularly. And as I was talking about before, the low success rate and the high rate of recidivism. So that's just putting into context my kind of experience of being a doctor. It is hard. Obviously you have to get into medical school, high grades, everyone knows that. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about even when you become a doctor, it's hard work, because you spend a lot of your late 20s and 30s, possibly all of your 30s, constantly doing exams and on calls. So I'm older now, I'm in my 40s, but before I became a consultant, I had loads of exams, loads of on-calls where my non-doctor friends were going out and clubbing and getting wrecked at the weekend. I did that sometimes, but I also had a lot more commitments than most other people. Also in competitive fields, I don't think psychiatry is that competitive, if I'm being completely honest, but in some competitive fields like, say, orthopedic surgery, plastic surgery, it's so hard to get a training position that you have to wait months or years for the right one to come apart. And I know husband and wife couples of my friends who are both surgeons, and they've literally been separated geographically because there's not enough training posts in the same areas. They've had to live apart because of the training. So that is how hard it can be to be some types of doctors, some specialties. The other thing I say is the pay is good as a consultant, but it's pretty low on your way there. It's low at the beginning, especially given the number of hours that you have to work. Now, I won't bore you, but there has been this European Working Time Directive thing which cuts down hours. So junior doctors don't have to work the same number of hours now as I did in my day. But in some specialties, you're expected to work without pay. So surgeons are a really good example. Some of my best friends would say that they're paid to work from, say, 8 in the morning till 5 p.m. But everybody comes in at like 7 o'clock in the morning and they work till 6 or 7, they do extra surgery. And if you don't do that, you won't get sacked, but you're not going to get like the promotion. You're not going to become a registrar if everybody else who's going for that same post does that. The point I'm trying to make is that the hours are long and the pay, especially initially, is low, especially for the number of hours of unpaid work that you do. On top of all of these things, I think it's fair to say that doctors get less respect now. They're not seen as these bulwarks of society as they were, say, a generation ago. Patients are more entitled. They can Google things and expect that they know everything because they read it on Google. On top of all of that, the junior doctor contracts. I don't know if you guys know this or remember this, but Jeremy Hunt, which is rhyming slang, threw everybody under the bus and like cut junior doctors' pay, but tried to make it look as if junior doctors were being unreasonable, and did something similar with GPs. Consultants' pensions have massively dropped. So just within the last few years, if you're a consultant doctor, your taxation on pensions, I believe, has increased. The amount you get in your pension has overall decreased. So money's being squeezed out of it. GPs are being made to work more hours. There's loads and loads of NHS management, and some people would say that a lot of it is just bureaucratic and is not particularly helpful, and they get paid quite a lot. And then there's more paperwork now than ever before. I think I'm not being dramatic when I'm saying that the quality of life of being a doctor has worsened significantly in the last, say, decade, maybe 2 decades, and I think it's the worst that it's ever been. Let me know if you agree with that, especially any doctors or people that know doctors listening to this in the 𝐿𝐵𝐶𝐵 below. Okay, so that's me bitching about being a doctor, but that wasn't the question. The question was whether I would still recommend being a doctor. For me, my answer is yes, and that's because I was fortunate enough to stumble into a particular niche specialty, forensic psychiatrist, rehabilitating mentally disordered offenders, that I find fascinating. So for me, I don't mind having to put in all this time because I'm genuinely interested in what I do. For other people who've maybe gone into a specialty that is not that fascinating, but they might have done it for whatever reason, there's less competition, or there's less hours, so it makes them, it helps them juggle family life more, then I imagine that it must be pretty crappy to work if you're not really interested in it. So what I'm trying to say in a very rambling way is, I think I'd still recommend being a doctor for somebody, but only if they're absolutely passionate about being a doctor and about helping people, and if it's not about the status or the money. I'm going to say something controversial here now, which is that I think it's fair to say that a lot of people, especially Asian parents, will push their kids into doing medicine because of the status and the money, and it's not necessarily because it's about helping people. And there's nothing wrong with that. People are allowed to do that, but I guess what I'm saying is I think the status and the money has decreased significantly. So if that's the reason you're getting in, you're going to be disappointed. Actually, there's a stand-up comedian called Ronnie Cheng, who I think is on the Daily Show. He's a very funny guy, and he does a stand-up sketch exactly about this. If you're watching this and you can find that sketch, that clip, can you please put it up in the comment section below? Okay, I'm just going to quickly take a very quick break to ask you, my dear viewers, what kind of cases do you want me to cover more in this channel going forward? Do you like my newsjacking kind of celebrity cases like Boris Johnson or Julian Assange or Jimmy Savile? Or do you like my high-profile true crime cases like Catherine Knight, who decapitated her husband, or Joseph McCann, who went on a UK killing spree? What do you want to see? Let me know and I will try and accommodate your needs. Okay, back to the questions, just a few more. Deborah Mulkey says, dress more professional, dude. We can see that you've got guns. Well, Deborah, firstly, I think your video you're talking about is the video where I ask for the questions in the 15K AMA. I was wearing a vest. Firstly, I was actually wearing a shirt at the beginning of filming that, Deborah, but my guns were so big they just burst out and my shirt fell off. And secondly, it's my YouTube channel. I can dress how I want. Okay, next question, Miss Schmooby Cakes. My question: were there any patients that you really did not like, not due to the mental health symptoms, but just unpleasant in general? I know as part of your job you have to maintain professionalism, but how do you overcome this when you have to work with them for prolonged periods? That's a very good question, Ms. 𝐿𝐵𝐵𝐾𝐬. Yes, absolutely. So, as you'll know if you watch my channel, I deal with mentally disordered offenders who have committed a lifetime of violence, often, not always, but often. And some of them are nasty pieces of work. There's not really any other way to put that. Well, in clinical terms, I guess you'd say that they've got antisocial personality disorder, but in working with them on a daily basis, so I'm not talking about the assessments for court reports, I'm talking about in secure units, long-term rehabilitation, where I'd work with them for years at a time. Some of them can be quite nasty. They can be aggressive, they can be hostile, they can kick off. Violence is, I wouldn't say it's very common, but it's certainly not unexpected within these secure units. They can be racially abusive. I've certainly had my fair share of that. I've been punched in the face twice. And yeah, so the answer to your question is, yeah, there are many patients that I do not like, but as you said yourself in your question, Ms. 𝐿𝐵𝐵𝐾𝐬, I have to maintain professionality. So I have to treat them with the same dignity and with the same impetus to try and rehabilitate them and get them through hospital towards discharge as I would somebody I liked. I think there's ways of dealing with it. So one is to set boundaries as much as you can and make sure that there are consequences for their actions. So for me personally, if somebody's really aggressive on the ward, then I'll stop their leave, which will stop their progress. But at the same time, if I was to look at this selfishly, which I won't, it is better for me to get them through the system quickly if I don't want to work with them for many more months. So it's actually in my interest to help rehabilitate them quicker so they get to leave. The other thing I think is really important to say is I go out of my way to try and understand the context of the people who present in my secure units. So to be specific, almost all of them come from a context of horrific backgrounds, physical and sexual abuse, really poor parenting. They often, within peers and gangs, they have a problem with authority. They've probably, to be fair, not been treated particularly well by police, psychiatrists, maybe teachers. So there's a reason. Nobody's a dick for nothing. There's also a reason. There's always a reason, and often they've been victims. So I try and remember that. So to answer your question, to summarize my answer, I do feel that way, but I try my absolute best to not let it bleed through into my professionalism. Okay, and the other thing I think is only fair to say is that the nurses, who I think are massively underpaid and I've got a lot of respect for, that I work with in psychiatric wards, they bear the brunt of it because I swan in, make my decisions, and I go off and do other types of really important psychiatrist work. The nurses are based on the wards. They have to really deal with the aggro from some patients. Also, I'm not talking about all patients, by the way. I'm talking about the antisocial ones. Okay, almost finished. 𝐿HAG photography. How many days a week do you work out? I work out 8 days a week. No, I'm kidding. I try and work out every day. I often don't because otherwise sometimes work's just too busy, literally don't have the time, or sometimes I'm too sore from not taking a break, so I have to give myself a day off. Sometimes I'm hungover, not that much because I'm 43 and I've got kids, but occasionally that'll be a reason. But I try and fit it into my day, and I think I'm lucky in that a lot of my work is report writing, so I can do that whenever I want. So I get up really early, ridiculously early, 5 a.m, 5:30 a.m. sometimes, to bust out a couple of hours of work before everyone else is woken up. That leads me to go to the gym mid-morning to take a bit of a break. I love doing it. It's part of my routine, helps my mental health as well. So to answer your question, as much as possible, probably 5 or 6 days a week. Okay, that's enough for this part. There will be a part 2 because I don't want to make it too long because I know you've got all these celebrity videos to watch and you've got short attention spans, etc., etc. I just want to say that I promised you a present and I am a man that's true to my word. So I will put a link down in the description box to a short story that I've written. So I used to write short stories probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Did a series of them. I'm going to choose one of my best ones that I think you'll enjoy. I think it's going to be funny. It's going to be poignant. And all of my stories that I'm going to link to have won competitions. So, sorry, that's not true. All of them have been published. So they're good enough for an editor to have selected them of many stories that are submitted. I'm not saying this to show off, but I am. It's just to say that it's going to be of a decent standard, otherwise it wouldn't be there in the first place. And I'm going to put a link to a couple of other presents that I've given out for my previous AMAs. If you're a subscriber from back in the day, first of all, thank you for your loyalty, but you've probably seen this before. If you're relatively new, then you might not, but I'm going to put links to me doing a bit of stand-up comedy and also me battle rapping against another doctor on a hip-hop game show for TV. I kid you not. Right, I feel like I've been talking non-stop. Enjoy the rest of your day. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Keep watching my videos. Stay euthymic. Do not forget. Life is made for living, you know. Hello, my Psych for Sore guys and gals. Apologies, I should have put this earlier on in my video, but I was distracted. If you're interested in my AMA and you were interested in the questions that I answered, and if you want to know more about my life working as a professional forensic psychiatrist, treating mentally disordered offenders in courts and in prisons and in psychiatric units, then I think you're going to love my book. That's the one, called Into Minds, where it's similar to a lot of the topics that I addressed for both of the AMAs, but it goes into a lot more detail. It's funny, it's autobiographical. I think it's a good book. Obviously I'm biased, I'm going to think that, but I did, to be fair, rewrite it about 6 times until I thought it was ready. So go cop a copy, you can get it off Amazon and the usual places. That's all I have to say. Peace, have a pleasant evening, stay euthymic, goodbye.